I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. Got a good one in store for you. My guest today is Ernie LaBrecque. He is the host of Virginia is for Conspiracy Lovers podcast. Very excited to have him here. Ernie, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. Doing great. Good to be here.
Yeah, for sure, man. Like where this is headed already. You know, I'm trying not to jump on shows every time and say, oh, the conversation we were just having before the show is fire. But it was, and so I feel like I have to acknowledge it. But yeah, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself, about your show, my man?
Yes, I do the Virginia's for Conspiracy Lovers cast. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you can find podcasts. We also have a YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. We have been on hiatus for a few months now, trying to move this little closet studio into a bigger space, but I've been building a hot rod in the other space. Taking way longer than it should. But yeah, we do, me and my co-host Daniel, we do Virginia centric conspiracy. I was born and raised in Williamsburg, Virginia, kind of in the shadow of William and Mary, the first college on the continent here, and tripped into some of this secret society kind of hidden history research, just kind of fell into it backwards and really fell on to some stuff that people hadn't found and assumed I was dead wrong and there was no way a dummy like me could have figured some of this stuff out. And I started bringing it to some people who weren't dummies and they were like, holy crap, no, this is legit, dude. Mm-hmm. And then it's just been years now of about 8 years of me trying to prove that what I think trying to prove my theory wrong. You know, every time I fall into something, I go, okay, let me work backwards and show how I'm wrong. And sometimes I do, but a lot of times it's way more interesting than I thought originally. And what it all boils down to is, you know, my hometown in Virginia, I believe, was for lack of a better explanation, almost the jumping off point of a breakaway civilization for the Stuart bloodline, facilitated by Francis Bacon and the Virginia Company of London coming over here, sending the ships over here in 1607. When you really break down who was on those ships and what they were and what they did and what they tried to do when they were here, kind of outside of the kind of fairy tale Disney Pocahontas story, things get really, really weird. And when you trace those people back onto the back to the English throne, the Stuarts being a very clear line all the way back to the Merovingians, and that's where you get this, you know, divine right of kings bloodline, this idea that we are chosen by God to rule, whether you believe it's because they were of the bloodline of Christ or like me, that they just, you know, use that story as a way to imbue their bloodline with more power and kind of mystique to maintain these monarchies. There's a long intro.
I see some similarities between you and I already with this research stuff. Like I also stumbled into a lot of things and I thought, okay, maybe I'm crazy. Then like you said, I work backwards and I'm like, okay, I'm not crazy. This is real. Next step, how do I tell this to people and have them not think I'm crazy so they can start to look at, you know, that whole cycle. So what this has become is it's become a show, at least in part, dedicated to all the stuff that was left out of our history books, which, as you know, is a lot of material. So we have our work cut out for us.
That's my passion. Like I said to you on the last show that we were on together, you know, if you read history books from the 1950s, General Custer was a real good guy. You know, so, and then a little more research is done into his egotism and megalomania that he was. And you read a later history book with more information and research done, and you find out he was the douchebag. You know what I mean? Like, he got a whole bunch of dudes killed for his own ego. And we're not even talking about that long. You're talking about maybe from the 40s and 50s to up to, present day, or even like the 80s, 90s, 70s is when they start like really looking at kind of the horrors of manifest destiny. And that just is a little microcosm showing, like, clearly you can't say that when someone comes forward with a new piece of information that might crap all over what's been like drilled into us as history. You can't blow that off. I mean, we're constantly, rearranging the paradigm every year, every archaeological dig, every new, manuscript that's uncovered, we figure something else out. And,
Yeah, it's amazing to me how quick some of this history can be forgotten / swept up / disappeared, right? And there was a show I did recently, and I read out a couple quotes. We were talking about ancient America, and in the 1850s, I think it was, I read a quote from Chief Rolling Thunder. Great quote about, I think, the true nature of America. Then we read a quote from the 1920s by a guy who was appearing as a historian in some of the newspapers in the 20s. His name was Hale Merritt. And you examine the Chief Rolling Thunder quote and then look at the Hale Merritt quote, and you can see that he doesn't have the memory that they had of things. He hasn't been able to maintain the memory that they had just 70 years before him. So there's a lot that can happen. We're trying to go back and like shuffle through all this and put everything in the correct order. But if I was to parse through some opening words to get us started, because just for the listeners, right? Like, because we are going to talk about Francis Bacon, obviously. I just want to say a couple things for people listening. Bacon was possibly Shakespeare. We can get into that more. Bacon was a Rosicrucian. He had, like you said earlier, he had all these interesting ties to the New World. He had a company over here helping to set things up in regards to the New World. He was a mysterious backer of this Virginia colony. I think you mentioned it's been suggested that he is the true founder of America. I think even Thomas Jefferson had a quote about that. And then you find that he writes this book called New Atlantis that later all these guys who start the country are reading. And he was talking about tall buildings, flying machines, submarines in the early 1620s. How did they know this? How did Nostradamus even know about the land that keeps the Thursdays? How did they know that we were going to have a holiday every Thursday over here? And it's like, what did these guys foresee? So, and I'll just cap it off with this. Bacon believed, from what I've gathered, he believed the pursuit of science and gnosis was the way to achieve the great work, the heaven on earth, the new Atlantis. They were very much setting out to build that up, believing that to be destiny, even.
Because Gnostic, creating heaven on earth, creating yourself as God. That is again, like I was saying to you earlier, I think Bacon is the linchpin of those early Gnostic Luciferian ideas. And then when he creates, the scientific method, which is applied to social science with Freud later on and whatnot, it goes back out into the world as the same Gnosticism, just under this like kind of empiricist lens, to where it's almost, you can't argue with it. Well, it's science. You know what I mean? Like no, it's not exactly science. It's what you have laid down and said was science. And don't get me wrong, I think that Francis Bacon is quite possibly the most brilliant person to ever walk the face of the planet. But I think that he, like a lot of brilliant people, leaned into the more Gnostic side of
or just the
big question.
The big question, I like that. Or the Gnostic / the occult side, because the revival of Atlantis was foretold by the ancient Greeks, and I think that's what he was deriving a lot of this from. Yeah. And why don't you hit me with that all roads lead to Bacon thing you were telling me about?
Yeah, so the way, through all my research, the way that I've seen it is everything I research and everything every path I follow backwards ends up with Francis Bacon, or at least his milieu, his good pens, and his kind of salon society of thinkers of the Elizabethan Shakespearean era. And so from now back, I find most everything that we're talking about here going back to Bacon. And then likewise, I see everything from the distant past coming up and funneling into Bacon. And then he kind of, like I said, puts it under this scientific method and, empiricist lens, and then shoots it back out the other side, and it turns into America. But I mean, everything from, we always talk about all these different bloodlines and occult bloodlines and early Canaanite tribes and these mystery schools from Egypt and from Mesopotamia and from Babylon and, all over the place, up into the medieval times. And we're talking about the Order of the Dragon and stuff. Well, you can see every bit of all of those get funneled down into England at some point, and specifically with Francis Bacon. And then they are then put into this book, the first folio of Shakespeare, which becomes almost a manual for between the New Atlantis and the first folio of Shakespeare. I mean, it becomes a manual for how our fairy tales, our mythos, our ethics, our government. I mean, it's truly mind blowing how everything is in these plays from 1623. It's all just distilled down into these works, which I think we both think Bacon had a hand in. And
man,
he's kind of the linchpin. Yeah,
he's the linchpin. That's what I was about to say. It seems like he was the linchpin for the Royal Society too, right? The British Royal Society. So, and that's a that's
early
like
Royal Society, early.
Yeah,
That's
like a show. That's like a show in itself, because what I saw looking into that was, when you look at the milieu of people surrounding that, this was like the seance becoming science.
Yeah.
So you had these occultists, if I can just call Bacon occultist, which he was, I think he was
100%. Even if you're in the most loose definition of occultist, everything he did was secret. One of his big famous quotes, a good friend of mine has a podcast called this, is "The hidden life is best." So hidden is really what occult means.
Right.
So whether you're talking about him putting personal secret codes and everything he wrote, or if you're talking about him really studying and practicing the occult mystery school kind of mysticism of the past, he fits in both ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's like they, and again, this is something that a whole show could be dedicated to, but it's like these occultists were rebranding alchemy into science, and that's a whole other thing. But I just want to say, like, the Rosicrucian aspect to this, I wanted to touch on today too. I've been studying more up on them. They were very into Egypt. They were where Egypt is kind of where we get this story of Atlantis. The Rosicrucians, including Bacon, were into Greece as well. Greece is also kind of where we get the legends from Atlantis, because they got it from Solon in Egypt. So speaking to the Rosicrucian connection here to Egypt and Greece, I see it in my city. We have an old Egyptian church here. It's called the Downtown Presbyterian Church. It's an Egyptian style church. I think it's older than they're telling us, one of those type of things. Yeah. And then we have the Greek connection too, because we have the statue of Athena. And I think that there's a connection to Francis Bacon and that statue of Athena, which maybe I can get into later, but I'm pretty sure that there is, because Nashville was one of these cities that was put here with a lot of intention. And I would not be surprised if he had something to do with it. And that's why we have the statue of Athena.
And the lore with Francis Bacon and Athena and the writing of Shakespeare, right? He had a literary society at that time, the time the Shakespeare plays were being written and performed, called the Society of the Helmet.
Yes.
And the Society of the Helmet was named after the societies. And it was, a secret society. Really, it was kind of like a literary society, almost like the salon culture of like Paris just before the revolution, where it was generally just, groups of very learned people getting together, writing things, discussing things, debating things that wasn't super kosher to debate in public. You might get put in the Tower of London for heresy or God knows what. And so he had the Society of the Helmet, named that after the society's patron muse, which was Athena. Athena was known to wear the helmet, and she was known to shake her spear of knowledge in the face of the beast of
ignorance,
right? And that's why she appears on the Virginia flag, because George Wythe, over 100 years after Francis Bacon, is obsessed with Francis Bacon. Like you were talking about Jefferson earlier, George Wythe was the mentor of Thomas Jefferson in my hometown in Williamsburg at William and Mary. The first law department of any school in the country was George Wythe created it at William and Mary. One of his first students was Thomas Jefferson. George Wythe basically mentored and tutored and taught every one of the founding fathers, Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, a bunch of the Randolphs, signers of the Declaration of Independence, architects of the Revolution. George Wythe taught and mentored all these guys and transferred this obsession of Francis Bacon to these guys. So much so that Thomas Jefferson had up to, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the woman that Thomas Jefferson married was a distant relation of the Bacon family. And then Thomas Jefferson went so far as to employ up to 7 people at Monticello who had a direct lineage to the Bacon line. He also was like the only person in the colonies to have a original portrait of Francis Bacon.
Mm-hmm.
He was obsessed. Our founding fathers were obsessed, and likewise obsessed with Bacon's obsession with Egypt and Greece in particular. And when you really dig into why he and the Royal Society and Francis Bacon's milieu was obsessed with Egypt and Greece and Rome to a lesser extent,
Sure.
you inevitably run across the mystery schools and the occult that was involved in their pantheons and their religious and mystical, systems. And then you see, again, like I said, you got Bacon in the middle, and then you see all this Egyptian and Greco-Roman symbology vomited all over this new country. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Right down to... Yeah, go ahead.
No, and the goddess connection.
Yeah, for sure.
Which
because the goddess is really, when you drill into it, the goddess is the most important thing in those.
They centered these
Queen of Heaven. Yeah,
yes,
Isis, Ishtar, Ashtara. Like it's all the same.
Oh yeah, that's what I found. I mean, I've seen it in some Freemasonic documents that I wasn't supposed to be looking at.
For sure.
Let's just say I didn't have clearance for that because I'm not a Mason. And I've seen it with the Templar stuff I've studied. All this stuff was centered around this goddess worship. And I'll take it back for a second to that Society of the Helmet, Knights of the Helmet thing that he started.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, like you said, it's an Athena reference. But I just want to, break that down for people real quick. I think he was taking that name Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, directly as a goddess reference. It was Wilhelm is helmet. So you got helmet, shakes the spear. Where's the helmet? Shakes the spear.
Yeah.
Like you said, Athena shakes the spear in the face of ignorance. But it's a code name. It's a pseudonym. It's a artistic device directly associated with Athena. He said too that he heard a divine voice who inspired him to secrecy, right? Do you know about that story? Okay, so yeah, he was talking about in some letters that he heard a divine voice who came to him and told him to hide from applause, aka write a book with a pseudonym, and to write history into enigmatic writings and like mixtures of theater. So he's into this goddess stuff, and he hears a voice, and it seems like he was just doing what he was told. So I think again that we
Wow.
see this goddess thread. It's like
Do you know when he was quoted
I'll
as
find
talking
this.
about that? Yeah, because
I'll
that's
find it for you. Yeah, I'll find it for you. But he was it's like, was he told to become Shakespeare because of the divine feminine? That would be the question that I would pose
yeah.
in regards to that story.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool, man. And if you want to get, just Shakespeare nerd ranty about it, the name Shakespeare is unique. There's nobody named Shakespeare. The guy they attribute from Stratford upon Avon, his name wasn't Shakespeare. It was Shagspur or Shagspar or Shackspar. We can't find any education for him.
Right.
We can't find any evidence that he even knew how to read. There's nothing ever been found that was written in the hand of this minority stakeholder of the Globe Theater named William Shagspar. He was an actor and a minority stakeholder in the theater where these Shakespeare plays were performed, right? But we can find nothing. They've never found anything written in his own hand. Not a letter to him. Actually, not a letter from him. Not a letter to him. Not a note, a shopping list, anything. The only thing we've ever found, even with his name on it, is 7 signatures. A couple of them were on legal documents because apparently this Shagspar guy was a douchebag and was constantly getting hauled into court over being like shady dealings. I want to say he was like a wool merchant of some sort, and that's why he originally came to London. And so a few of those are on legal documents, and then the rest of them are all on his will. Okay? They're all spelled differently, and they're all spelled in a different handwriting, meaning the guy probably couldn't write his own name, and so the other person within the deal is the one who signed his name for him and misspelled it, and it's clearly written. And then referencing particularly the will, the guy who basically is responsible for the modern English language and the greatest writer in the history of the English language did not leave a book to anybody. He did not leave manuscripts to anybody. I mean, the guy left like nothing literary to anyone. And he was kind of a douche. He left the second best bed in the house to his wife. Like that was her big, and here's an interesting thing too. A lot of people look at at the church where he's buried in Stratford, right? And there's a bust of him that was commissioned 100 years after he was already dead. See, none of this Shakespeare fever started until 100 years after Shakespeare was dead. And this bust of him he's got like a book or paper in front of him and a big quill. Like that's a famous picture you see is of that bust of Shakespeare. It's his face. He's holding a quill and there's paper in front of him. Well, there's evidence to show that particular bust was actually changed later on down the road, and that it originally he didn't have any paper or quill in his hand. There's a really cool guy, I can't remember his name right now, so I won't go into it, but he's done a lot of Shakespearean research, and what he found was the original work order for the bust. And what the bust actually was this Shagspar guy holding a sack of wheat or grain of some sort, right? No paper, no quill. And because he was depicted as that in this bust for his memorial, because nobody liked him. Because when he came back from London, he had hoarded a whole bunch of grain, and then in the years just before his death, the whole country, but Stratford upon Avon, in this case particularly, went through a drought or a time when grain was really, really sparse. And a lot of people in the town, leaders in the town, were coming to him hey, you got a silo of grain, can you? And he wouldn't. He hoarded it all and kept it all for him. This guy was a douchebag.
Yeah.
And
and I looked into it too, and not as much as you have, but enough to where I walked away from it with the impression that he wasn't glittered enough.
No, his wife couldn't read. His children
Right.
couldn't read. His parents couldn't read. So you're talking about a guy right in the middle of that, all of a sudden becomes not only literate, but quite possibly the most literate person on the
Oh yeah,
planet.
creating words and
Right.
phrases and
But
what
never,
so.
never thought to be like, hey, let's get the kids in school or let's teach them how to read a book. Get out of
Mhm.
here, man. The knowledge within the first folio of Shakespeare of courtly machinations.
Sure. That's what I was about to say next is like he had knowledge. He had to have probably been a royal, in my opinion, of
He had
some
to have,
sort.
he had to have been Bacon or of Bacon's milieu.
Yes.
These specific qualifications and knowledge that whoever wrote those plays had were follow the direct like path of learning that Bacon and his friends went on. They were lawyers. They were part of the royal court. They extensively traveled on the continent. I mean, there's specific things like there's a grove of, I want to say elms or something referenced in Spain, like near a palace in Spain in one of the Shakespearean plays that
Hmm.
you would never know existed because it was behind the palace walls. It wasn't common knowledge, and that you would never know it existed unless you had been there at that time, right?
Oh, in
It's
New
still there.
Atlantis. Yeah, oh, so in New Atlantis, he was talking about things about Peru that were not known yet in Europe. They
I actually
were,
think I actually
yeah.
think where he talks about Peru is actually an anagram for Europe. And I think when he says the I've done a little digging in and to trying to decode the New Atlantis, and I think that that first paragraph where he gives all the directions of where this boat came from, I think he's actually talking about one of the 1607, the 1609 supply mission boats that went missing that had exactly 50 people on it, which was exactly how many people were on this boat. But if you read it, it says it talks about Europe, or I'm sorry, it talks about Peru, which a rough anagram of Peru, you could make Europe out of Peru, right? Also, he talks about they left from the South Sea. And so you're thinking Asia, right? Well, the 1609 supply mission to Jamestown left from Plymouth. The part of the English Channel that when you come out of Plymouth, the part of the English Channel that you come into has historically always been called the South Sea, right?
Mhm.
And then it talks about the amount of time that it took them. They went east for a certain amount of time, and then they hit bad weather, strong winds, which pushed them northeast. If you look at where the 1609 supply mission hit the hurricane that crash landed the Sea Venture onto Bermuda, which the first play in the first folio of Shakespeare is written about, the Tempest, there was 9 ships in that fleet. Only one of them went missing forever, disappeared forever. The rest of them survived. If you look at where they hit the hurricane near Bermuda, right? So you follow what it says in the New Atlantis after leaving and heading west from the South Sea, hitting a strong winds, which then pushes them northeast, right? Well, if you follow that where the supply mission hit the hurricane and a Shakespeare play was written, and then follow that northeast, you run directly into Nova Scotia, which is where Oak Island sits. And you're talking about a ship. You're talking about a ship that disappeared that was sent off by Bacon. The other weird thing is that in that 1609 supply mission, there were 7 ships officially, but really there were 9 ships. There were 2 small ships that weren't big enough to sail on their own at the speed, the pinnaces, and they tied them to other ships and pulled them. Right.
Hmm.
One of them was called the Virginia. And the Virginia was the first ship built in the colonies, and it was super familiar with Nova Scotia, and because it did all the fishing up there for the colony, and then it ended up back in England at some point, got put on the supply mission. The other one was the Ketch. Now the Ketch is the one I'm talking about, because the Virginia in Gabriel Archer's private diary, he talks about 5 days out from England, the Virginia just inexplicably unties itself and sails off, right? And the Virginia makes its way back to Jamestown at some point, so we know that it did survive. But so now you got 8 ships sailing towards Virginia. One of them is tied to the Sea Venture, the one that the Tempest is written about, the Ketch. And it specifically says in all the histories that the Ketch was captained by a man named Matthew Fitch. And it specifically says it was captained by a man named Matthew Fitch, the mariner who came over with Christopher Newport in the first 1607 mission. Except for that, years later, John Smith puts out his full account of what happened in the early years on Jamestown in the settlement, and the mariner Matthew Fitch, who came over on the first voyage, was shot and killed by a Native American arrow. So all of a sudden, 2 years later, this same guy is captaining the one ship that disappears in the hurricane, right? I think that the New Atlantis is I think it's a companion work for the first folio of Shakespeare. They are written around the same, compiled around the same time. They're released around the same time. And if you read the New Atlantis, which it sounds like you have, tell me it's not almost unreadable because of all the numbers in it. I mean, every other word is a number. It's like, we came within 5 meters of him, and there were 7 people on 8 canoes, and they sent 2 guys up. They asked how many of us were sick. We said 17 of the 50. They took the 17, put them in 19 rooms. They put us in 20 rooms. And like, I mean, you're talking about Francis Bacon, a master cipher writer, and I've pulled every number out of that book and I've applied it to a couple different, but that's not my wheelhouse. So
oh man, that's
it's in there.
So it's encoded. I listen, I assumed it was encoded.
Yeah.
But I didn't think about it I didn't think it was this heavily encoded. And I get it, man. I've looked into that Bill cipher years ago. I tried to crack that. And I was looking through old documents like Declaration of Independence and some of the other documents it's tough once you get these numbers. You start to feel like you're in a beautiful mind or something. You're going crazy.
Well, and especially the guys who encoded these things, they were far more steeped in this kind of stuff, and they've got shifts in it, so you may get the key to break the cipher, but that doesn't mean that the code is going to come out with that key.
Sure.
Bacon is famous for putting out one work as the code and another work as the cipher, and then somebody breaks the cipher, but then they have to shift the cipher, and he'll put stuff in there like math problems that change the cipher. Like if the cipher comes from taking all the numbers out of a book, you'll take all the numbers out of the book, but you don't decode it until you realize that where he says twice 3, that twice actually means multiply the 3 next to it. Then all of a sudden it opens up the code into all kinds of you got that guy, Peter Amundsen, that went up to Oak Island. He's a brilliant Shakespearean code and Bacon code breaker and concert pianist. Again, a type of person far above my capabilities. But those are the things that he was able to figure out. It's code on top of code on top of code.
Yeah.
It's wild.
I've got something about that Oak Island. I didn't expect to jump into this soon, but I've got it right here. And let's see. So what I think happened there, and we'll have to backtrack after this and talk about.
Just nudge me, shut me up if I'm running my mouth, because I get on these stairs and I'll just keep running.
I like where we're at, and we've established that he was encoding his work. I think that's key to understand, because I also think he was encoding that New Atlantis with this blueprint to start up a country.
For sure.
We can go into that too. But
in my opinion, the breakaway civilization for the continued bloodline that held all the beliefs in the old mystery schools, which I think had distilled down into the Stuarts at that time.
Yeah.
And you look at the Stuarts responsible for aiding and abetting the Templars, the Stuarts responsible for Rosslyn Chapel,
Exactly.
But at the same time, they were constantly getting killed off and deposed from immediately. As soon as King James took the throne, the first Stuart king of England, he had a reign, but then the following Stuart gets deposed, brought back. One's a Catholic, one's a Protestant. The next one's a Catholic. The next one's a Protestant who kills Catholics. The next one's is a Catholic who's cool with Protestants. Everybody focuses on the religion thing with that that family and that bloodline. And I don't think it has anything to do with the religion. I think it was just what they used to continue kind of furthering their bloodline. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the Sinclair family is involved with that treasure of Oak Island. And there's an account here. For all these reasons, there was much about Rosalind Chapel that William Sinclair would not have wished the Roman Catholic authorities to know. The Knights Templar had been disbanded and made illegal at the beginning of the 14th century. They were considered heretics. Anyway, this is just going on to give reasoning. But I think it's this part right here. There is ample evidence to suggest that most, if not all, of these treasures were removed from Rosalind Chapel, and most likely that would have been in the 1860s, and they were taken to the United States, where they remain to this day. I think maybe they took them some of that before then, but there's all these accounts here about this. I just wanted to kind of read one to get it on the table. But treasures, including Bible treasures, once we're talking about crazy stuff that was once in Rosalind Chapel, moved over here to the U.S., hidden in vaults over here. I think that Oak Island was a vault. That's why they dug down into the ground, and if you watch
safety deposit box.
Yeah, but if you watch, remember in National Treasure, where they break through this hole in the wall and they go down, and it's just a big, huge shaft, and down you go down, and at the bottom there's a room with a treasure vault. Yeah, like I'm not trying to just base everything off of this movie, but I think that may have been what they had there at Oak Island, man.
The evidence for these secret vaults is all over history. And if I can add to that, I believe, and this is what got me going on my research, I believe that they at some point moved that treasure off of Oak Island and moved it to my hometown, Williamsburg, Virginia. Manly P. Hall's wife decoded a bunch of Shakespeare and a whole bunch. If we get,
dude, I was going to ask you about this.
Yeah. She decoded a bunch of Shakespeare and a bunch of Bacon and a bunch of tombstone inscriptions from the tombstones that sit in the churchyard at Bruton Parish in Williamsburg, and called the parish. This is like in the 1920s. Calls the parish and says, "Hey, I know you don't know where the original church sat on that property, but I can tell you to the inch where to find it." Because they had rebuilt it in 1740, right? Mm-hmm. They go out and dig where they found it, and they find the original footprint foundation of the original church. She's doing this from California with Bacon, Shakespeare, and tombstone epitaphs, right? Then she goes, "Okay, you found that. Not only that, I believe from what I've decoded and what I've researched that there is a vault underneath where the bell tower would have been. So it would have been on the west end of the original footprint, 20 feet down, and it's a 20-foot by 20-foot vault, 20 feet down underneath where the bell tower was, right? Well, what happens right after that? Rockefeller comes in, buys the entire town. I mean, literally kicks people out of their homes. Williamsburg was not what it is today, this shiny plastic living museum. In the 1920s, the capital had moved a long time ago to Richmond, and Williamsburg in the 1920s was this rundown backwater southern town. I mean, right on Duke of Gloucester Street, where like the famous like historical sites are, was like old like greasy spoon diners and like gas stations where you could get your oil changed and stuff like that. The Rockefellers come in right after Marie Bauer Hall, Manly P. Hall's wife, discovers where she thinks this vault might be. Rockefellers come in, kick everybody out of their homes, buy up the whole town, and turn it into a living museum that you cannot do an archaeological dig in without the express written consent of the Rockefellers. Guess where they came from? Guess where the Rockefellers came from, where they were at doing the exact same thing before they came to Williamsburg. Stratford-upon-Avon, the home of William Shakespeare.
What?
That is literally the beginning of the tourism boom of the Shakespeare fever, is what The Rockefellers helped them do. Yeah.
They were on the case. 100% had to have been.
And
he had a bunch of stuff. He had a bunch of stuff encoded in that house too, right? We don't have to talk about that right in a second, but just saying these places include all these clues.
And then at the same time, what we were talking about earlier, the Rockefellers, then at the same time in the 1920s is when they create the curriculum and outlaw all other kinds of alternative medicine. So they take over the medical field to benefit their petroleum products. They take over, the Rockefellers are responsible for prohibition. The Temperance Society had been banging the drum to get people to stop drinking in America for 50 years, right? Mm-hmm. The Rockefellers never had any hand in that. Then all of a sudden in the 1920s, when people start realizing, holy crap, we can take our moonshine and power these new vehicles, these new inventions, these plows and motorized vehicles that we're using for our farms, we can distill our waste and use that as fuel for these things. Well, that hurts the Rockefellers because they're oil men, right? Right around that same time, all of a sudden the Rockefellers dump millions into the temperance movement, and what happens? Prohibition happens. Prohibition gets turned around with help from the Rockefellers, okay? So they had a hand in imposing prohibition, then they have a hand in repealing prohibition, but when prohibition gets repealed, the penalties and such for brewing your own booze, that goes through the roof. So, all right, you can drink again, but don't you dare pour any of it into the vehicles. You got to use gas. At the same time, they're also buying up a ton of between them and the dude from California. They're buying up all the paper mills and newspapers and textbook manufacturers. So they're going to Stratford upon Avon, helping cement the lore of this Shakespeare guy. They're coming to Williamsburg, helping cement the lore of the early founders of this nation. And at the same time, they're writing all the textbooks. So they're creating the mythos, or steering it at least, and then putting it in the books.
Yeah, they've created an infrastructure put in place to enable them to shift the narrative whichever way, wherever they want it to go, whichever way they put their finger up, lick it, and stick it in the wind. They've got control over all of it.
And ensuring that no one will ever, for a long time, no one will ever really dig into these subjects and go, hey, I think there's weird buried. I think there's weird stuff that was already here. I think there was, you know what I mean? No, because your textbook says blah, 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 blah. So there was nothing here that came, like there was, So do you think Rosslyn, some of these treasures that were held at Rosslyn Chapel made it to William and Mary and in a vault there? Check this. I could show you a Google Earth. I think one of the things in particular, and this is something I put together that I don't think anybody else has, I think one of the things in particular was the Spear of Destiny, or what they said was the Spear of Destiny.
Hitler was looking for that too.
If you draw a line so there's a gigantic representation, the best representation of a Kabbalistic tree of life. I mean, you see them in other towns, the way people have them laid out or discovered them. They're a little wonky. You got to use a little mental gymnastics. Go, yeah, it kind of looks like it. The campus of William and Mary is a perfect representation of the Kabbalistic tree of life. Perfect. The buildings, right down to every measurement on that campus is 666 feet, or a multiple, or a base of 666 feet. But particularly, there is a perfect Kabbalistic tree of life, right? If you go through the crown Sephiroth, and I can't remember the top right Sephiroth, right? And draw a line, follow that path, you land directly on Oak Island. Then it runs from Oak Island directly across England through the north of London, lands on Istanbul, okay, which was the original. Yeah, Istanbul. It was oh God, I'm blanking.
It was Constantinople.
Constantinople.
That's where the first two Templars were initiated.
Right, and it was the seat of the Holy Roman Empire for a while. Mm-hmm. You continue that line, and you know where it falls? Nowhere else. It lands on Antioch. But not anywhere in Antioch, directly on the front door of the cave chapel of St. Peter. Okay? Yes, St. Peter. It's called, I don't know, it's got some crazy, it's in Antioch now, but it's got some crazy name. But it is literally the cave church where in the first century, the apostle St. Peter taught secret Christians about Christianity, right? That was where he preached from, St. Peter, in this cave. Now check this out. During the Crusades, there was a point when Antioch was besieged. The Christians held Constantinople, and they held Antioch, right? So they held Constantinople, but then also Antioch, right? And so there's a bunch of Christians, crusaders inside Antioch. They had taken it away from the, I guess, Ottomans or the Saracens, and they're holding it. Well, then it gets besieged. They're surrounded by Saracens, right? And they're coming in to kill them. There's no way that they can survive the siege, and there's no way that they can survive the battle. This peasant guy wearing just like a sheet in the middle of the siege comes up to some bishop, and is like, hey, I had a vision last night from God that says if you dig underneath the altar in St. Peter's cave church, you will find the spear that pierced Christ's side, right?
Okay.
So they're like, okay. And also, if we hold that spear, this is where this is
power.
This is the origin of that story, that the army that holds the Spear of Destiny can't be defeated, right? This is the origin of that story. So they go up to the cave church, they dig, right? And there is documented evidence, like they wrote about it. The bishop wrote about it. People there on the dig. This is in the middle of the Crusades. They wrote about it. You can read about it. And what they say is they dig and they dig and they dig and they don't find nothing. And then all of a sudden they find this little piece of metal and they pull it out. And this is in a cave in Turkey, underneath an altar where St. Peter, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And what do they do to venerate the altars? There's a holy relic buried under every Catholic church's altar in the entire world. So they find this thing. They announce it to everybody in the city, and the next morning, chanting like madmen, like outnumbered like 5-1, they go out of the city and they beat the crap out of the Saracens, and they survive the whole thing. The Spear of Destiny, that spear point, supposedly makes its way then to Constantinople. So if we're following my line from the cave, it crosses to where the Spear of Destiny went next. Then it goes further to the north of London and goes directly over. Now check this. This is, I could show it to you on Google Earth too. It's insane. I searched all over that line in England because I was like, clearly it's going to fall on top of like a Francis Bacon like monument or some like cathedral or something. I never noticed. I mean, it was years. I just gave up. I was like, it just must have been somewhere north of London that like isn't there anymore. Whatever. Finally, I'm digging some more and I'm following this line, and I find this piece of land and this old building called Bruce Castle.
Okay.
And I'm like, Bruce, weird. So I look up, and specifically the line goes over this round tower. And so I look up this property, and it turns out that before Scotland gained their independence, the whole Braveheart thing, before all that, they were English. Well, the Bruces were Scottish lords. And because they were Scottish lords, they also had properties in England. This was the property of the Bruce family, specifically Robert the Bruce. And the house has been redone a million times, but that tower, they claim they don't know what it is, but they think that it's an old well because it's crazy, crazy deep, and it's the oldest thing on the property. Okay. Right?
Vault.
Also, Francis Bacon, the owner of that property, later on down the line, Francis Bacon was good friends with, bought property from him as well. But so you follow it from the cave church in Antioch to Constantinople to this deep well of the Bruce family.
Yeah.
From there to Oak Island, from Oak Island to Williamsburg, where this.
Okay. All right. Let me add something in. So
wild.
That is wild. That's wild. So, and I can see it in my mind. I can see this line. So we're talking about treasures, the Spear of Destiny. Scotland has been introduced to the conversation. So Sinclair, who builds Rosslyn Chapel, he's hiding these type of treasures from the Roman Catholic Church. Also, the English at the time were warring with the Scots. So he was building all these secret tunnels to hide and house all of this stuff, to hide it from the church and possibly from the English. And the Templars and monks of the secret societies were used to help build these tunnels for him. What he did was he swore them in. He swore in these monks with a secret oath, and they say that this was a early form of Freemasonry. Yep. Rosslyn and Rosslyn Chapel, it's in Scotland. We know that Freemasonry is strong in Scotland.
The first, not only that, I mean, I'm steeped in the origins of Freemasonry, and the first like kind of recorded, you know, Freemasonry doesn't go public until 1717. So you're talking 100 years after, you know, Francis Bacon. But I
think it was embedded in these orders of monks.
Oh, it was
for a long time.
And Scotland in particular, because there was the, I can't remember the name of the lodge, but it was in Edinburgh, and they have proof that the first Scottish king of England, King James, Bacon's boy, was initiated into the lodge in like, I think he took the throne in England in 1603. I believe he was initiated into that very, very early Scottish Freemasonic, lodge in like 1590s or something like that.
Yeah.
We know that Freemasonry goes back at least that far.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got,
well, and then there's this Templar association too.
100%. I mean,
because I think the Freemasons came out of the Templar order. I do personally.
Too. You look at
but these are older traditions. Like, and I know arguably you can trace Freemasonry back to other events, and you can trace some of it back to like Tubal-Cain or the ball with two cane, or a cane with two balls, you know, all that sort of thing. Or Solomon's Temple, where he had to incorporate stonemasons for that, and there were probably, you know, older versions of the Templars there as well. I get all that, but that tradition was held, and it didn't become modern Freemasonry, like you said, until the 1700s. But I think it was held with some of these more or lesser known orders, like the Cistercians.
I think it was distilled from the mysteries, all these mysteries.
There you go.
Eleusis, Egypt, Babylonian, Kabbalah, all this stuff was distilled down to the people who cared and also had the money. You got to remember too that the Knights Templar, these weren't, you know, they took the name the Poor Knights of Christ, but they weren't poor. They were all the second sons of hugely wealthy, influential, knowledgeable French aristocracy. So they were reading old manuscripts. There was a reason that they wanted to go over to the Holy Land, establish themselves for a full year on the Temple Mount, and dig under it. You know what I'm saying? So
that's a tradition.
It was a quest for knowledge. It wasn't. They weren't regular crusaders, and then it just gets passed down. And so I think Freemasonry takes shape as what we know as Freemasonry around 1415, 1600s. But I think really what it was until then was kind of a loose amalgamation of all these mystery schools and bloodlines, and you know, I don't think it was united. I think they were all going in like kind of different directions, but with the same occult mystery school understanding. And I think that when the Templars, who I think they did a huge job in amassing and collecting all this knowledge, treasure, and wealth, then they get outlawed. Well, who helps them out when they get outlawed? The Scottish.
Right.
So it all comes to this
all comes together.
Nexus point right there.
Yeah, and another nexus point would be that it was the tradition of these secret societies and mystery schools hiding treasure, where we could filter it back or draw it back to the story you just told about William and Mary. It's like they're over the ages, they continue to do the same thing. They move the treasures around, and just like whoever put them there under Solomon's Temple in the first place, they carried that tradition on. And so now you see Sinclair I think moving this treasure over here, and the Templars probably helping him. I could get into why I think that,
Yeah.
by the way, but there were these markers and obelisks placed all
Yep.
over the place over here, because that's going back to the Greeks talking about the Hesperides, the land of the blessed, this
Yeah.
this land of the Western Hemisphere set aside for the philosophical utopian empire, for us to revive Atlantis. They knew about this land, and they chose it early on as a place to come over here and put their vaults and hide these treasures,
And then
and
look at what
and encode it in all these manuscripts.
yeah. And what's
Encode
really
it in the
cool-
chapels.
Yeah. And then in modernity, well, not total modernity, but I mean, you look at what does Nova Scotia, where Oak Island is, what is it originally named? Acadia. What was Acadia? Acadia was basically Valhalla for the Greeks, right? And then you look at like William and Mary, which is kind of the coolest part of William and Mary to me is you know, the college has begun in the 16, but obviously it's a university still operating today. So they're still building buildings, and they're still putting in, you know, statues and monuments and things like that. Dude, I believe that there was a Masonic influence. Basically, it was created by Masonic influence, the college. And I think that there is at least some sort of Masonic influence kind of stewarding and steering that college to this day. For example, in 2010, the geology department, okay? The geology department puts a big geological rock garden in this really random place at William and Mary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it just so happens that where they put it, it lands on the Sephiroth of the Tree of Life that's there. It marks that Sephiroth, and that Sephiroth means foundation. So you've got all these rocks put there in 2000, huge boulders put there in 2010, directly on top of the Sephiroth that means foundation, closely associated with like elemental rock and stone and whatnot, right? But
Right.
my whole thing with that is, you know, the whole point of these secret societies was to protect a knowledge or a treasure of some sort, right? But you can never guarantee that your order, because they knew just by looking at their own histories that you can never protect these orders to where they will last forever. But you know that if you encode things and you at least keep pushing the knowledge, that a later order who has the same ideals as you can look at these cities, these towns, these buildings, these monuments, and if they're adept, if they are in the know, they can go, oh wow. The same thing that we do when we're not personally Masons, but we know of the history and the symbolism. We look at our hometowns and we go, that seems weird. And then by looking into that, it opens up a line to the next thing in town. And that's exactly what happened. I literally fell along the path, the like breadcrumb trail that Masons left for themselves by building, you know, Williamsburg in the way that they built it. And it's led me to like, dude, I have been approached. So I owned we just closed it down. It was really successful and it was awesome. It was just too much for us, but I'm a chef, classically trained chef, and we own 2 restaurants and we just recently shut them down. One was called Oyster Society, and I created this fine dining restaurant it looked like no other fine dining restaurant in the world.
By the way, one of my favorite things on the planet is oysters. One of my favorite foods.
I'm sorry that you didn't get to come to the best oyster restaurant in the country, but I didn't want to make it like, you know, like a modern fine dining restaurant because it's so clean and grayscale and boring and like surgical. So it was in a Victorian era building. And so we did this like dark, creepy Victorian era motif. And I've been collecting Masonic and secret society regalia for years. So like, I mean, there's a skull and crescent paddle up there. Like I've got robes from the Oddfellows. So we created,
the walls were like
covered.
I don't want to like compare your business or your restaurant to Ruby Tuesdays, but that's kind of the image I got, because the original Ruby Tuesdays that
Was
they
like
had,
covered with
they cut
stuff.
with all this eclectic
Yeah.
stuff, but yours
But
was Freemasonry and
it felt
secret
like you were in a
society.
lodge of some secret society. It was called,
The-
our official name was Oyster Society.
Oh, I see.
Oyster Society, but our official name was Ordo Templum Austrium, Order of the Temple of the Oyster. And we did all kinds of weird stuff. Like everything was very macabre and dark. Like we had a dessert that was served in a tarnished pewter goblet that, like, I had this raspberry compote, but like this red wine raspberry compote that we would like dip the glass in and then turn it up so it looked like blood running down the sides, and you had to like eat it. Like, anyway,
Yeah.
I don't remember why I started talking about my restaurant, but like
I got it. Well, so I'll bring it back because
yeah,
you were
I had
on
a
the
point, but I forgot.
well you're on this breadcrumb trail of all this stuff that's been encoded in Virginia. I mean, I think it's encoded all over the nation, but specifically in your area.
Yeah.
So, and you're saying that I think you were inspired on this journey of yours to kind of decor your restaurant with some of these
Basically, what I
fascinations.
was gonna say was, we had that restaurant, and it looked like I was the biggest fan of Freemasonry because I had all
Right.
this old Freemasonic regalia and stuff all over the walls. And one of our regulars was the worshipful master of one of the oldest lodges in the country, the Randolph Lodge in Petersburg, where the restaurant was. He actually had me come and do 2 talks at that lodge about the history of Freemasonry in Virginia. But then he would bring like the Grand Master of Virginia to the restaurant all the time. And I can't tell you how many times those guys would like shake my hand and be like, "So how come you're not a brother? You seem to have an interest." And my pat answer was always, I'm really enjoying like figuring the stuff out without the cheat sheet. But these guys recognized that I was recognizing their patterns. Right. And it just goes to show that they do put these patterns out there for adepts to, over the ages, to stumble onto and go, I know that means this. And then they can figure out the rest, because
They certainly do.
Even if they
do. And I wanted to point one out. In a minute, I'll try to find a better picture, but this is the mural at one of the murals at William and Mary, and I'll have to find it, but over here off to the right.
I've seen it. I've sat right there and looked at it.
Okay, but so I think it's off to the right. It's out of this picture. I'll try to find a picture in a second, but there is a lady holding a skull. Yeah. Yeah. To me, that symbolizes some sort of a matriarchal bloodline that was involved with all this.
So this is exactly what I was saying, in that I believe that it's still, regular secular folk work and plan things at this college, but I believe that this college to this day is stewarded and steered by some sort of Masonic ideal, because that, on another podcast, we pulled that up. Actually, I think it was the podcast I was on with you on Occult.
It was. And you know what? We didn't talk about it. I didn't see it till later, because on that show, he panned across the whole mural. And by the time we got to the end of the mural where the lady holding the skull is, I was looking down at something else and I missed it. And we didn't even talk about it on that show.
It's supposed to be a literary mural, like paying homage to like literary greats and stuff. So you've got like, I'm not sure where this is at.
I gotta find that. It's out of the frame in all these pictures, but it's there. I'm telling you, it's there. Well, my point here is that that's an old symbol. They used to put the lady holding the skull in all these old paintings, and they would put them up. They would line the walls in castles and royal houses all over the place with that. And it was a symbol of the matriarchal bloodline, the bloodline that's passed down through the mother.
Yeah.
And it gets into this goddess worship thing as well. But when I saw that later in this mural, I was like, there is a matriarchal bloodline involved with William and Mary. There's got to be. What do you say to that?
Well, I think just look at what the college is called. Can I share something with you real quick?
Yeah.
Let me see if I can do this real quick. I'm gonna pull up Google Earth real quick. And I'm just gonna, because it kind of helps to see what my little alignments here. And then I just go back and I share, correct?
Yeah.
All right. Finish doing what it's doing. And we won't
And
get
also, while you're doing that, I'll point something else out. You said Oak Island was Acadia, right? At one point,
Sure was.
that blows my mind because Acadia was home to some of the most potent goddess lore and associations to Ishtar, especially. Like some of our clearest reliefs of Ishtar come out of that Akkadian empire. So just to touch on the goddess thing once again, I think that's all through this.
All right.
I think yeah. Do you need a little bit more time? I could pause it.
No, I'm just hit go. We were talking about the.
Okay, so yeah, we paused it. We weren't able to pull that up, but you remember, maybe you could just describe it for everybody.
Yeah, you were talking about the goddess worship, and I look at the campus of William and Mary, and it's literally called William and Mary. Queen Mary at the time was the last of the Stuart monarchs. There was never another Stuart English monarch again. It was very unusual to name at that time anything after a woman. But if you look at you can go back and look at the YouTube videos of the alignments on the campus of William and Mary, and particularly the Tree of Life diagram that's on there. Well, the very first building of the campus of William and Mary was the Wren Building. Now, the Wren Building was named after Sir Christopher Wren, who was the head of the Royal Society, and was also the architect tapped with rebuilding London after the 1666 fires. Again, 1666, Sir Christopher Wren, first building. Every single measurement on that campus is a 666-foot measurement. But where that building is the crown sephirot of the Tree of Life in my William and Mary Tree of Life. So that's the very top of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. It's the tip that everything comes to, right? And then you've got the two columns on the side. One is male. The one on the left is female. The one on the right is male. And then they come up and they end and they meet at the crown sephirot. Okay, so the three sephirot on the left are female, three on the right are male, and then they come up and they join together to create the union of the masculine and the feminine, which William and Mary just so happens to be named William and Mary, the marriage of the masculine and the feminine. And again, it points back to that androgynous goddess worship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, man. And that's the thing. Like it's been suggested, and I'm starting to see this too, and come to this conclusion that Francis Bacon and the Rosicrucians believed that powers and principalities from the spirit realm possess this secret knowledge that you can tap into, and in turn you can use for the benefit of mankind. There's this convergence of Christianity and the occult, you might say, because some of these yeah, there you go. Some of these early Rosicrucians, I mean, they appear to have been Christians. So anyway, but they thought that you could like John Dee, right? And he's a part of this whole crew, the Queen Elizabeth Court, which I want to get to at some point today. But I think the guy was a Christian, and I think he just thought that he was able to talk to the good spirits and get information from them. But of course, you don't just get the good spirits, you get the bad spirits when you do that kind of magic. So anyway, they thought, I believe, some of them believed that they could tap into this information and use it for the benefit of ruling mankind. Whether or not they had nefarious intentions or not, I am not entirely sure. But they thought that it could be harnessed and used.
Yeah, I think it's the slippery slope that anybody gets into when they start practicing. I don't want to sound like a Bible thumper too much, but I think this all can be explained between between God and Gnosticism, the God in the way that we look at it, the Christian God and Gnosticism. I mean, really, no matter how far you go back, no matter what religion, what pantheon, anything, you can go back to a creator God and you can go back to a trickster God, right? It all ends up in the same place. We're just coming at it from two different points of view. The Christians and the Abrahamic faith are coming from creator God good. The Gnostics are coming from creator God bad. Now, the early people who thought creator God bad and Lucifer good, they weren't called Gnostics. They were the mystery schools, and they were venerating all the fallen angels, and whether they called them fallen angels or not, they all match the fallen angels, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're venerating them. And so these mystery schools come down. And when after the medieval period, after the Templars go to the Holy Land, find all these grimoires and things like that, and these stories of Solomon and all this stuff, right around the medieval period, you've got these nations, these Roman Catholic nations that are steeped in Christianity, these devout Christians, but now they're starting to get their hands on these grimoires and all this ancient knowledge and stuff like that. And they're like, well, dang, they don't have the benefit of time like we do, where we know, hey, probably not a great idea to like draw a circle and salt around yourself and invoke some spirit. You know what I mean? We know by other people's experience, probably it might not turn out great, right? They didn't.
Yeah.
They're studying this stuff and they're messing with it, and they're starting to get results and contact. And so I think
that's what happened to John Dee too. John Dee and Edward Kelly, yep. They ended up being tormented by these beings.
Yeah.
They're like, Edward Kelly, oops, I think we contacted demons on this one.
Yeah, it started out as, oh, we're talking to angels, we're talking
right.
to angels, we're talking to angels, until one of the angels says, oh, by the way, Jesus wasn't the Son of God. I just need y'all to know that. I mean,
that's what he told Kelly.
And that's when it switched, and that's when things got real weird. And it's also when they started wife swapping and stuff like that, which is funny.
Yeah.
But I really think that it you can look at it really simply, and there were always two forces. But it wasn't until that medieval era when Christian Gnosticism became more mainstream, and it became a really good cover for, and I think I'd say 90% of the aristocrats who came over to start this country were deists, were Christian Gnostics, in that they could call themselves Christian Gnostics, and it just seemed on the surface level that they were another sect of Christianity. We'll dig into what Christian Gnostics are. Christian Gnostics believe that the Christian God isn't the Christian God.
Right.
And that Lucifer is the good guy. So you're not.
Yeah,
but you have that name. And then it gets
you
packaged.
look back and you see that the name of Jesus is conspicuously missing from all these documents.
Right.
They would allude to God, but it's like, okay, which God?
Right. So it gets put into this neat package as we're like Christian mystics. And that, coupled with the scientism that develops out of the Rosicrucian person of the same kind of ilk, Francis Bacon, you combine Christian Gnosticism with scientism, and then you end up with what we have in America. You have these founding fathers who, Thomas Paine, who writes Common Sense and is this devout Christian, and then a few years after the Revolution writes his pamphlet completely denouncing God and Christianity. So you have these guys who were clearly thinking one way, but I'd say out of the founding fathers, you could pick a handful of guys who weren't these kind of Gnostic deists. John Adams, for my money, I think John Adams was the last decent president that this country ever had, which is sad considering he was the second president.
Was he the anti-Mason party?
So his son was. So John Quincy was later, but John Adams.
All right,
No, go ahead.
I just want to say one other thing, because I'm sure you've got a crazy history of that too. But let me just say this before we get too far down the road. I want to comment on something you said. I think you said a lot of great things there. It was these beliefs, right? There was these deist, Rosicrucian, Templar. ancient occult beliefs that these guys had, out of which they orchestrated the creation of America. The Norvos Ordo Seclorum, the new order of the ages. They took that from a Virgil poem about the return of Saturn, and they revised it
directly out of the poem. Yep.
They revised it to mean we're the new order of the ages.
Yeah.
This was the order, I believe, that set out with the intention of building the new Atlantis.
Yeah.
So that's how it all comes together, right? If we're to bring it together in my mind. And then later, you still see this echoed, I think, in modern times when you've got presidents like George W. Bush, who gets up in 2005 in his inaugural address and says, when our founders declared a new order of the ages, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
He's still passing the information down, just like the order passed down to Francis Bacon, in my mind. And then Bacon just don't get it started.
Then look what happens with his son. Within 2 months after archaeologists find the tomb of Gilgamesh, we invade Iraq.
The resurrection chamber.
Create the largest embassy that we've ever created in the entire world directly on top of the resurrection chamber of Gilgamesh, right? Mm-hmm. And then up through the years, you've got Obama talking about the resurrection chamber. You've got, there's a reason for this stuff, and it is ancient knowledge, period. I know it seems to the regular person like super woo-woo, like,
oh man, when I said what I said, right? When I say what I said, man, I can feel how weird that's going to sound to some people.
It sounds crazy, dude. It sounds crazy, but read what these elites write, what they care about, what they study. It doesn't matter that you don't believe in Mithras worship. They do. It doesn't matter that you don't believe, like they do, or they at least care about learning about it and finding out if it's a power that they can use and that they can wield in some way. They care about it now. I think everybody looks and goes, oh, we have iPhones and we have Teslas and stuff, so we're out of the woo-woo days. We're not. Those people at the top still care about that stuff. They at least care about finding out if they can exploit these things.
They do. And they care about it under the umbrella of a very big, a very large, very power-wielding word, which is destiny. To them, This was always about a rendezvous with destiny. Land was supposed to be the philosophical empire and the paradise of their dreams. And there's, even to this day, there's a godlike statue of Destiny, capital D, Destiny, on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. It's not just Pennsylvania Avenue. You go anywhere in D.C., there's nods to this all over the city. Part of the secret, I think, for them was democracy itself. We could have a conversation about, was this really meant to be, should it have been a republic or should it have been a democracy? We could have that conversation. But democracy is what they seem to be enthralled with. That seemed to be interwoven with the destiny of this place, whether good or bad.
It's bread and circus on one end, and it also frees them up to act and to study and to do the things that they want to do. This is a free country, freedom of religion. So it looks good. It's bread and circus for us because we're like, we have all these rights, and this is a great place to the American dream and whatnot. Meanwhile, those same kind of rights and stuff open up the elites with the knowledge to practice the more nefarious side of these rights. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It really is bread and circus. And the more I look into this, the more it comes back to two sides. It really comes back to that garden scene. There are two sides, and everything came out of those two sides. And it's been a battle ever since, which is, even as a Christian and getting into this conspiracy stuff, with a Christian background, I'd say, maybe not practicing or a very good Christian, like early on getting into this stuff, I never thought I would have heard myself relate all of this back to that one nexus point, which is, the serpent and God. You know what I mean? But God, follow the lines. follow the tribes, follow the peoples that they turned into and the peoples that they turned into and the places that they conquered. Follow them back systematically, and you end up back in the Levant, just like we were talking about on Daily Dissident. You follow them all the way back, and it all distills back to the Canaanite tribes, and then the other side that was trying to do stuff the right way. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Manly P. Hall has talked about a lot of this, of course, and he said for thousands of years they planned this. They worked on bringing this philosophic democracy, is what he calls it. I don't know what they called it in Babylon, but he said for thousands of years this is something they wanted to happen. And it feels like too, like when you bring in the work of Francis Bacon back into this, and you see that he titles his book New Atlantis, and below he says a work unfinished. That makes me wonder. That brings us to maybe another level of this conversation, which is have we completed the dream of the ancient occultists yet, or is this still being planned out? Were they waiting on something massive to happen, like a massive shift in humanity, like the technological boom that we've seen in our lifetime, for this to be finally completed? Is technocracy,
Age of Aquarius,
technocracy, singularity, age of Aquarius, was all this been on hold until now, and this has just been a building the staircase moment for them all these years?
Yeah, it's a big
Because I
question.
mean, I could
But
feel
yeah.
it, man. It feels like something more
Yeah.
is to happen here.
Yeah. Something's afoot, and I think it's closer than people think. Well, do you want to rewind back to
Yeah,
and get into
let's do
some
it.
Bacon stuff for a little while before this?
Yeah,
Because I kind of had like a good little, kind of an interesting little intro.
that's actually perfect, because I was going to suggest that we go back to either Bacon or Rosicrucians. So yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so Francis Bacon, I want to show you this thing that I found that may mean something and may mean nothing, but I think if I read this to you beforehand, you might see where it means something, and that's that the number 357. Okay, we're talking about Francis Bacon, the number 3, 5, and 7. We know that that's an important Masonic number. It stands for the first 3 degrees of Masonry, or it also stands for like mind, wisdom, experience. I can't remember, but 3 is generally thought of first 3 degrees of Masonry. 5, the 5 senses of the human, and then 7 is the 7 sacred sciences. Okay, but the number 357 has been steeped in Rosicrucianism, occultism, like and particularly Freemasonry, all over the place. Right now, smarter men than me have found 357 encodes in Shakespeare and Francis Bacon works, hundreds of them. They are the number 357 is a marker for a shift in coding. It is specific page numbers. It's 357, 357, 357, right? So I learned the 357 thing, and I've got this gigantic Norton facsimile of the first folio of Shakespeare here, which is exactly how the first folio of Shakespeare came out. It's literally a photocopy of the first folio of Shakespeare.
Can I point out too, because I'm just thinking about this number 357, right? Your even numbers, your succession of even numbers is going to be 2, 4, 6. So 357 would be section. So I can't say that word today, but you get what I'm saying. It's the odd number version of that.
Yeah, they call it the construction numbers in the occult.
Is it left hand? Like left hand kind of a thing?
Yeah, I think so. It depends on how you frame it. But yeah, that's where I would put it.
Okay, interesting.
All right. Let me get here real quick. I'm so sorry. So basically I took the number 357 and the idea that, they have found within Shakespeare's works and within Bacon's works, these markers of the number 357, particularly in page numbers, line numbers, word numbers. So I'm like, all right, simple enough. Let me do the dummy thing. And what's really crazy is this gigantic book is the first folio of Shakespeare, right? I mean, it's a massive tome. The page numbers are insane. Like, you'll be on page 131 and then turn back and you're on page 37. I'm all the way back here in the back of the book. It's page 35. And then I flip forward and it's 217. And then I flip forward more and we're at 295. Like, I think there's people have done a lot of work into the decoding of how the page numbers go. The crazy thing is that the very first folio, or the very first Shakespeare, the very first play in the first folio of Shakespeare is The Tempest, which, strangely enough, was actually the very last play written by quote unquote Shakespeare. But it becomes the very first play in the first folio of Shakespeare. And its page numbers are perfect. It's the first page, it's page 1, and it goes all the way through in sequential like it's supposed to, unlike the rest of the book, right? So I'm like, and also The Tempest is written about the Francis Bacon supply mission in 1609 that crash lands on Bermuda and they spend a year there, right? And I believe that also is involved in the New Atlantis. So I go, okay, well, I know page number, line number. So I'm like, let me go to page 3 and then go to line 3. All right. In The Tempest. And page 3, line 3 of The Tempest says, this king of Naples being an enemy. Okay. So I'm like, well, who is the king of Naples? So I look it up. King Philip of Spain. You know, that was back in the day when you were the king of everywhere. Right. The king of Spain, the king of the Netherlands. He was, at that time, in the time of Shakespeare and Francis Bacon, the king of Naples was King Philip of Spain, right? So I go, okay, King Philip of Spain. Next number is 5. I go to page 5. I go to line 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it says, the honor of my child. Okay? I go very, So, I go, it's kind of nondescript. It just says the honor of my child. So we got the king of Naples, the child, and then you've got the page 7, line 7, was never graced before with such a paragon to their queen. Okay. So in 357, in the first folio of Shakespeare, in the very first play, the only one that has proper page numbering, right? You get the king of Naples, the queen, and the child. I think this is Francis Bacon, and this is a hot take, and it may be crazy, but I have some other things to back it up. I think this is Francis Bacon making a nod to who his parents were. So Nicholas Bacon and his wife are supposedly the parents of Francis Bacon. But it's long been rumored that Queen Elizabeth was actually the mother of Francis Bacon. So much so that a few months before Francis Bacon is born, in early 1561, a bunch of people had come to court to visit court, talk to the queen, hang out, do their thing, and then they went back home to their manors and their villages and stuff. And then shortly after that, the queen sent some dudes out to hang a bunch of people and to cut their tongues out for lying about the queen and saying that she looked pregnant. A bunch of people went to court to see the queen, left, went home, and then were like, hey, dude, I don't think she's the virgin queen anymore. She looks pregged up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's interesting is that, okay, Queen Elizabeth becomes the queen after her sister Mary dies. Now, Queen Mary had Queen Elizabeth locked in the Tower of London because some people thought that she had a better claim to the throne. Not really, but Bloody Mary was Bloody Mary.
Yeah, she locked her up because of
well, Mary was Catholic and Elizabeth was more Protestant and
right. She like, well, what's the word for it? She was pro-Protestant, but I don't think her personal beliefs were necessarily Christian.
No. Queen Elizabeth was incredibly intelligent and also mentored and tutored by John Dee. And was definitely almost like, maybe you could call her like a libertine. She was very liberal in that that sense. And
Sure.
she was interested in mysticism and astrology and all this stuff.
Well, that don't you think that could have been a reason why Bloody Mary had her locked up, was because of this association? Because they sort of punished John Dee for this stuff too. They kicked him out for a while
I
because
think
of his occult practices, mystical beliefs. They said it was his strange experiments, alchemy and all that as well.
I think it could have been a reason. I think the main reason was that Mary didn't want to lose her throne. Now, their father was Henry VIII. Henry VIII is the one who split England from the Holy Roman Empire, from the Catholic Church, because he wanted to bang other chicks. Because his wife at the time was the either daughter or sister of Philip of Spain, and she couldn't give him any boys. And
Gotcha.
So he wanted a divorce. Well, he went to the Pope. The Pope said no, because he wanted a divorce from a highly devout Spanish Catholic. I mean, she was Catholicism. So he said no. So King Henry,
Bloody Mary.
King Henry split, and then he marries Anne Boleyn, and he has Queen Elizabeth with Anne Boleyn. So he has daughter with the original. Then he has Queen Elizabeth with Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn can't give him any boys. He has her hung for treason. And then he marries not a common woman, but not, somebody that's overly,
Sure,
bloodline heavy. And he has a son. Well, originally when Henry VIII dies, the son goes into power. He's young and he's sickly and he dies. So the next person in line is Mary, right? So Mary, she's devoutly Catholic because her mommy was devoutly Catholic. And this is at a time when England has just switched from being Catholic to Protestant, and the Catholics are hated. And then she comes in and she starts just murking Protestants. I mean, that's why they call her Bloody Mary.
I think this is the rise of the Rosicrucians personally as well. I think it was they rose up in opposition to this strong, overbearing Catholic rule, Catholic centric empireship. And the
Protestant side was a little bit more accepting of the scientific research
and the mystical.
Yeah. So Mary dies in 1558. Elizabeth becomes queen in 1558. She's coronated in 1559. King Philip of Spain, so her sister's widower husband, the King of Spain, proposes, this is surprisingly, and not a lot of people know this, but King Philip of Spain actually proposes marriage to Queen Elizabeth in 1559. All right? Francis Bacon is born in January, first thing in 1661. Okay? So Bacon's conception, when whoever his parents were, he would have been conceived in later spring of 1560. Now, obviously Queen Elizabeth says no to the marriage with Philip of Spain, but she keeps him very close. She kind of never says no, actually. She just kind of like leads him on for a while because she wants to keep Spain as an ally, and but it's always been in my mind seeing this thing saying the child, the queen, and the king of Naples, that there's something there that's solid. And so I look up, and there was a point where Elizabeth is in London, and in early 1560, Elizabeth is in London, and the King of Spain, Philip, is in Brussels for a time. And this is when communication is going back and forth, allies between the two. And all you really have between you is the English Channel. And the English Channel is heavy and diplomatic envoys going back and forth and back and forth. Tons of private coastal landings back and forth with secret meetings having to do with state. And Queen Elizabeth in particular is known for maintaining secret diplomatic channels.
Well, she kind of had to. She was under threat. She thought the Catholic Church was trying to kill her, and they may have been. And that's why John Dee was called the first 007. I think his number that he used
Yeah.
as a spy was 007. But that's how close they were. John Dee's so close to Elizabeth that she has him as her spy. He goes around, he's trying to figure out what the Catholics are up to and all this and that and everything else. So I mean, I don't know where you're going with this. I'll let you finish it up, but I think it'd be cool to come back in and talk about for a second that Queen Elizabeth, Francis Bacon, John Dee circle and its importance to everything.
So, I went blank for a second. So, what better way to keep the Catholics off her back than to get knocked up by the King of Spain, the strongest Catholic nation in the country? They're just a channel away from each other, specifically in the exact time that Francis Bacon is conceived, right? He's born in 1661, approximately 9 months to a year after she's her closest to being where King Philip of Spain is. And then he is born and immediately, the official story is that he is born to the Lord Keeper of Elizabeth's Lord Keeper of the Seal, Nicholas Bacon, and his wife, who is her direct lady in waiting, right? Tons and tons of lots of ladies in waiting took over illegitimate children as their own. It's like a tradition.
Sure.
You keep the aristocrats from the heat being on them by going, here, you raise this kid. Except for that Francis Bacon wasn't raised by the Bacons. He was raised within the palaces. He was educated, right? A lot of the speculation
So do you think that this is a clue that you found pointing back to that? He's leaving clues as to his true heritage.
Look at a portrait of Francis Bacon. Well, first look at a portrait of Francis Bacon next to who his supposed father is, Nicholas Bacon. Okay? Then look at a portrait of Francis Bacon next to his other supposed father, which was, his name's escaping me right now, but it's the guy that spent time in the Tower of London with Elizabeth, who supposedly was secretly married. They were secretly married in the Tower of London. She made him her Lord of Horse as soon as she became queen, and then put him in a room that adjoined to her room in the palace. But look at a picture of Francis Bacon next to that guy.
Not him.
Can't be. Yeah, they're both gingers.
Okay, well, who do you think it is?
I think it's Philip of Spain. I think Francis Bacon's father. I think that Queen Elizabeth, being the brilliant statesman that she was, and trying to make sure that the Catholic Empire didn't come down, I think she refused marriage to Philip of Spain. It's proven that she led him along without saying no to the actual marriage. She was in close proximity, just the English Channel away from him, in an area where she was constantly having envoys and secret meetings across the Channel at the exact time that Francis Bacon is conceived. And what better way to keep Spain off your back than doing the old school thing that monarchs always did?
Alliance.
They got a hostage, and Philip of Spain was known. He had tons of illegitimate kids. And I think that Francis Bacon, now again, like I said,
so she's the mother. According to this theory, Queen Elizabeth is the mother of Francis Bacon.
100%.
And I don't see why not. I mean, they were. That makes sense because he would have had that. Now he would have been brought up in some sort of a secret environment, right, where they didn't just put that out there in the public record.
No, like I said, people got their tongues cut out for saying that she just looked pregnant.
All right.
But you push this kid off over to your Lord Keeper of the Seal and your head lady in waiting, which queens and kings did all the time. They're right there. Your son is right there with you. He's raised within the court. He is educated within the court with private tutors, John
Bingo.
D, paid for and hired by Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth took an inordinate amount of interest in this Bacon kid and his education and his upbringing and whatnot. Now, she had to the biggest reason that she maintained the Virgin Queen kind of motif is that if she stayed a virgin, there wasn't a strong successor. All the women in her family had been, they've been trying to take them out of power. I mean, there was plots constantly on both Bloody Mary and her. So she knew if she had a kid, all they'd do was kill her off and then raise the kid until he was the king, and then, shove his head full of ideas of how they, these whatever faction wanted England to be ruled. So she could have a kid and care about the kid, but keep him a secret. So she maintained this virgin queen idea, and
Oh yeah, that's kind of what I was suggesting.
yeah, and not
Yeah.
bear the risk of somebody killing her off, so that, and then it's almost the same game plan that they used to further the Stuart line in America. They absolutely know that the Stuart line is not long for hanging around. They're constantly
Yeah.
being deposed and revolted against and whatnot. And then all of a sudden, immediately once James gets on the throne, they start this new project in the New World, headed up by Francis Bacon, the guy who was the secret kid of the Queen. I mean, it's almost the same.
Okay,
playbook.
yeah, and that would make sense to me as to why he was an initiate. I believe Francis Bacon was an initiate. Well, I think his mother, if this was his mother, I think Queen Elizabeth was an initiate. She was in that order, militia, Cruciferia Evangelica.
Okay.
I think I got those out of order, but those are the
I gotta look
words.
that up. I've never
Order Cruciferia Evangelica Militia, something like that. It was a underground Templar order, and
Really?
yeah, so this whole Queen Elizabeth court thing they were all Templars and Rosicrucians. They were the first Rosicrucians because
Yeah.
it was out of that order, militia Crucifera Evangelica, if I can get it right. That's where the first Rosicrucians start to emerge, from what I can tell.
Yeah.
And then they send Thomas Gates over here, Walter Raleigh. Also, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth. A lot of these accounts of these guys being knighted, that was, in my mind, that was a public ceremony, but it was tied into something that had already happened privately. And these guys were initiates. They were probably Templars. So, and there's this theory that even Sir Walter Raleigh was sent over here by Bacon to look for ley lines. I don't know if you've heard
him and Bacon were like this.
The Duncan Steele book, where he talks about how they were over here looking for the sacred 77th meridian that they wanted to put the settlements on. Well, he was doing, if he was in fact doing that, he was doing it for Bacon. So it's like, why was this court of Queen Elizabeth so invested in the New World and the colonies? Why were they trying to put them on ley lines? Where was there a plan unfolding here, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a supposed letter, because some people say, well, Queen Elizabeth wasn't, I mean, she had Mary Queen of Scots, her cousin, who actually had the better claim to the throne after Henry VIII died. She had her killed, and they always say, well, if Bacon was Elizabeth's son, and then why would he do all this work for the Stuarts, she wasn't, necessarily the biggest fan of. But there becomes a point towards the end of Elizabeth's reign where there's a falling out with Bacon and Elizabeth, and he's sent away. He loses his titles and things like that, and he's gone. And there's this letter that surfaced that they can't, who knows if it's real or not, but it literally is from Elizabeth to Bacon or to somebody about Bacon, saying that something, but he'll never gain the kingdom, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And Bacon was friends with the Earl of Essex, who surrounded Queen Elizabeth, created a revolt, surrounded Elizabeth, and nobody knows why. He got to the city of London, surrounded it, and basically took control and just demanded an audience with demanded an audience with Queen Elizabeth. And the speculation is that he wanted to demand that succession go to Francis Bacon. And right around that time is when Bacon kind of loses his titles and is like kind of shunned from court. And then the Stuarts come along and he's right back. He becomes the Lord Keeper of the Seal, the Lord Chancellor, he's King James's right hand. And so it's almost like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It almost feels like Bacon kind of realized at a certain point that who he was, who his mother was, but that didn't matter, and he was not going to gain. I mean, he writes everything as an imperialist. Everything he writes is very rah-rah, monarchy, empire, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? But,
oh yeah. Well, I mean, I think that could be John Dee's tutelage or influence, because John Dee, who is he? He's the empire maker. He termed the phrase British Empire and Britannica and some of the other phrases, but he was directly involved with creating what would become the British Empire. They were empire makers, this group.
Yeah. So a little bit more of the history with Bacon. He is at Cambridge by the age of 12. So he's in college at Cambridge by the age of 12. He leaves by the age of 14 due to boredom. They say by the age of 12 that Francis Bacon had read every book in print at the time. Contemporaries say that he made Plato and Aristotle look like children. And so he's in Cambridge by 12, dropped out by 14, and then is back at 16 teaching at Cambridge. And then he goes and studies law at Gray's Inn, and then he's part of Elizabeth's court. And then, like I said, you got the subsequent falling out, and then the subsequent teaming up with King James when James becomes the king. Now, I think it might be possible that during his studying and things like that, he realized that the Stuarts actually had that Stuart line actually had the better claim to the throne after King Henry VIII died, and that him being the staunch imperialist that he was, that he just recognized that and chose that side and that push. And then his esoteric and occult knowledge that he had of bloodlines and things like that, he most likely recognized in the Stuarts and not in his bastard mother who was born from Anne Boleyn. Yeah.
Yeah, man. And then he writes New Atlantis. I think that ties in with the statement I was making about these guys being empire builders. I think he was doing his role, playing his part, and sort of passing the baton, if you will, when it comes to that. And it said that when he died, the book he was writing was called New Atlantis, Land of the Rosicrucia.
Really?
Yeah.
So that makes sense with the way that Solomon's house is depicted in the New Atlantis. It's very lodgy, very order, secret, or not secret necessarily in the book, but very this overarching kind of order that kind of marionettes things on the island of New Atlantis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he was fully invested in it. It appears as if he was making that his life mission, his life's work, which is outstanding if he was actually Shakespeare, and I think he was. But for him to have this body of work as Shakespeare, and for him to be leaning into this Rosicrucianism as his legacy, says a lot. It kind of says where his head was at with all this. Like that would have been his, beyond it just being an order that he was a part of. It would be his religion at this point.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of that Gnosticism and scientism, basically putting the scientific, empirical kind of method towards these mystical practices and communications. It's almost a way to kind of shore up these mystical practices. Like we're doing all this stuff willy-nilly with all these grimoires and things like that we're finding all over the place, but we need take alchemy and make it chemistry. You know what I mean? So you're taking this kind of woo-woo mystical practice and you filter it through Bacon's Rosicrucian scientism, and it becomes chemistry. And so it's still magic, but it's magic under a set, like a way to really whittle it down and hone it into something useful. And look at what chemistry, and I mean, look at what all of these things that came from woo woo and turned into science. Look at how effective they are and how effective they have been into empire building. You know what I mean? I mean, look at the A-bomb. I mean, that made us the world power that we are.
Yeah, it's alchemy. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's repurposed alchemy.
It's alchemy done by guys with briefcases and nerdy glasses on instead of guys in long robes and funny hats like John Dee. I mean, he really took what John Dee was doing and getting persecuted for here and there and flipped it on its head to make it look, you know what I mean? To put it in the hands of people who were more, professional looking or just created the idea around it that this is science. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And to a certain degree it is. It's very muddy, but I mean,
you
could, they're bred.
You could go back and look at Isaac Newton as well.
Yeah.
And he was writing up all these alchemical manuscripts. He owned a bunch of alchemy books. And if you go and you look at the true beginnings of science, alchemy is everywhere. These John Dee types are everywhere. There was, Manly P. Hall talks about this a lot as well, where he said that it would become a time where, let's see if I can remember this, we would tell people how things like electricity work, not why they work.
Yeah.
That sort of unquestioned, or not, the sort of the spiritual nature of things that we don't have answers for, and we have more questions for. The why, that gets left out, and it's like, well, this is how it works.
Exactly. That's what I was just thinking, is like, plug a light bulb into a socket and create light, and tell me that harnessing that and putting it into a little box is not magic of some sort. Now, explaining how they were able to distill that down and figure that out and create that is the part that we really kind of miss, and we just take for granted all these miraculous things that happen. It's magic. I know a lot of it is magic, and a lot of it to the extreme detriment. Like, you always say that thing, hey, you play around with Ouija boards, something bad is going to happen. Well, we don't really look at a light bulb shining and be like, oh, something bad is going to come from this. But look at the difference in the lives of people where technology has had a hand in war and, the A-bomb again. Look at how many people we decimated with the A-bomb. Like, it was a miracle that we could make something that powerful. It also was absolutely devastating to a people. You know what I mean? Like, I think that still applies. I think in our everyday lives, we are literally holding and working with magic. Not just, it appears to be magic because it's something we hadn't seen before. No, it's magic. They just don't tell you it's magic. You know what I mean? They've completely rewritten the definition of magic to, if you're not a guy in a robe and a funny hat handing somebody an iPhone, that iPhone ain't magic. You know what I mean?
Yeah. They had a lot of faith in science. They were building it up. They thought it was going to be a pool of answers for them. And I think it turned out to be a shallow pool. It's not as great as these guys thought it was going to be. It is in the application of, for electricity and having
Yeah.
lights on in your house and having heat. That's great, but it's not the everything. It wasn't this major solution for all of humanity, especially not in a spiritual sense. They seem to think science would be this great spiritual solution to everything, as it's perceived to be, or a replacement for that.
That's exactly what it is. It's a
Yeah.
replacement. Look at the people who are still the most spiritual, and it's monks in buildings without running water, reading and praying and studying and stuff like that. I mean, there's really something to be said for, just look at the distractions we face. How are people, what's the first thing they do when you go to, even if it's some woo-woo yoga retreat, at Esalen or whatever, you turn your phones off and nobody's allowed to talk for the, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Shun technology and communication so that you can plug back into whatever the it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it convolutes our connection to God oftentimes, and it's good to shut it off. I agree. Yeah, man, this might be a good place to kind of wrap it up too, because I just looked at the clock. We just hit two
Yeah.
hours. So
Yeah, man, we did good.
been a wild ride, man. This one has. So yeah, what you got? Anything you want to wrap it up with?
Just that this country is far more. I feel like a lot of people look at America as a few 100-year-old nation
Yeah.
that doesn't have as much mystery as elsewhere, and I think that it's got the same amount, maybe more. I think this place was chosen specifically for reasons that have been lost to us, and that maybe some of these creepy elites know a little bit more about. And
Yeah.
I think digging into American history and pulling out the stuff that doesn't make sense, and we are our mythology in this country. It's so amazing to me that we are so young, but our mythology is so written in stone that, like, I just found out the other day that the woman who supposedly wrote the national anthem didn't write the national anthem. Wait, was a woman. I can't remember. It was something like that. It's a bad example because I can't remember the details, but like, I mean, it was something like every day I find out like a piece of history that is just like, yeah, that's the history.
Yeah, they had.
Why would they lie about that? And then you find out, no, they absolutely lied about that 100%.
Yeah, well, they had a guy who is mentioned but not named in a lot of the old documents. There was a guy they brought in. He was sort of like a mathematical savant, and he was an initiate, and they had him making up a lot of some of the stuff for us beginning this country. I'm blanking on the details too, but I know it's in Secret Destiny of America, where they talk about this guy that they brought in and had him. He was coming up with symbols and phrases and mottos, and this is how you do this is how you do that, this is how you align certain things with the stars, because they aligned the signing of all these documents with the stars. They had a guy who's not named, but he's alluded to. So there was like some secret, like, like a Count Saint Germain.
Did you read that about that guy?
That Manly P. Hall talks about that in Secret Destiny of America.
I gotta read Manly P. Hall. Every time I start digging into it, it seems so like he's telling you really good information, but then he's huckstering you a little bit too, because I mean, remember, he was a big part of all these orders, so he's not just putting everything out there on the, I mean, he was a Rosicrucian and a Mason.
He put a lot out there.
But he put a lot out there, yeah. It's like when I read Morals and Dogma too, I'm like, yeah, there's some good information in this, but Pike had to know at some point, like, other people were going to get involved in it.
This is, maybe it doesn't look that big in the camera, but this is pretty big. This is secret teaching of all ages. And I mean, look at the little tiny script, man. This thing is packed.
Yeah, I got to read it. I got to finally get to it. When I get through this Order of the Dragon book, I think I'm going to pick it up. This Order of the Dragon, you and me ought to read through that book and do some like companion podcasts to it. It's incredible. Every
Which
page
the
I
Order of the Dragon
by
book?
the Colleen
Oh yeah,
that
Clemens.
PhD. Yeah. Dude,
Clemens, right?
it is I've read a lot of books in this area of research, and I've never read anything that distills all the information from like the beginning of time about this order and this, it's mind blowing.
When we're done
Yeah.
today, if you think about it, send me a link to that book. I'll order
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I sure will.
I'll
Cool.
order it. I'll get one, and I'll read through it, and we can reconvene on that. That sounds like a good plan, actually.
Cool.
But yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm everything you just said in closing. I think I'm on board with all that. Those are, at the very least, very similar conclusions that I myself have come to with this stuff. And there's an element to this. Of course, it's an occult element, and of course, I've sort of doubled down and decided to expose some of that, if that's the word to use there. I've I've dug my heels in and decided I'm going to show people some of this because it's not talked about. Like I said, going back to the beginning of the show, this is the type of stuff that's left out of the history books. That's why I'm focusing on it. And it's not necessarily to highlight the occult for the sake of highlighting the occult. It's to show the truth, whatever the truth is, regardless of who that benefits. And all that being said, I think there was a group of Christians over here too. There is a reason why a lot of people think that this was a Christian nation, because they were over here as well.
Unfortunately, if I can just say something about
but
that.
the government, I'll let you, but to wrap up what I'm saying, the government, from what I'm seeing, was not the Christian faction.
Yeah.
But they were here. But
what I've seen when I do this research, unfortunately, being a Virginian and a proud Southerner, I find that the Mason-Dixon line almost separates, just like it did in the Civil War. The Mason-Dixon line almost separates because you have the rich, aristocratic, knowledgeable planter class down here, but once you get up north, you don't have that same thing. So you're looking at the difference between Thomas Jefferson, occultist,
no
and
question.
John Adams, not. He comes from more of that Puritan bloodline, guys who owned small farms, subsistence farmers, pillars of their community, politicians, learned, very smart, but they owned their farm to feed their family and to make their money. They weren't they weren't enslaving people and all that stuff. But there is a really staunch difference between those New England Puritan farmers and their idea of what Christianity was, and the difference between these slave-holding, aristocratic, planter class, deep bloodlines down in the South, and their kind of deist, Gnostic Christian, soup that they operated under.
Mm-hmm. And then you have the Thomas Kelpius faction that came over and operated out of a cave for a while in Pennsylvania.
Oh, in Pennsylvania? Yeah. Rosicrucian.
Yeah, the first. He's touted as being one of the first Rosicrucians. I mean, of course, I think he was.
Yeah.
Was he the first? I don't know. Like, we talked about a lot of other people who were Rosicrucians today who were over here messing around as well. But they started that first. Yeah, it was one of the first colonies. I think it was called.
It was almost like a commune.
Ephrata or something.
Ephrata or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was in a Rosicrucian colony that they started. I looked into it. Those guys it was one of Thomas Kelpius's followers who started that. And Kelpius came over here, I think it was late 1500s, because at the time Pennsylvania had the loosest laws on religious practices anywhere. It was like they were getting persecuted over in Europe for being alchemists.
Yeah.
I think from the church. I think the church was coming down on them. And even some of the government were starting to side with the church in certain areas. So they're like, we got to get out of here. So they retracted to Pennsylvania for a lot of reasons, but also the loose restrictions on religious practices. So they came over here and they start this Rosicrucian colony. So you've got those people in the mix too. that
And
they were outright
look at
occultists.
look at the great granddaddy of Pennsylvania. No other than Benjamin. I'm a part of 36 confirmed secret societies, Franklin. You know what I mean? So
That's exactly what I was getting ready to say, bro. I was
Yeah.
getting ready to say that. I was like, we didn't even touch, because when you said Thomas Jefferson, it popped in my head.
Yeah.
Because, Thomas Jefferson, yeah, I think he was involved with the occult. But I was about to say, man, we haven't even touched Benjamin Franklin. That dude
that's
was
a
deep.
series of shows. That dude was a creep, man. Like again, changing our history.
Hellfire Club.
Yeah, changing our history to color certain people a certain way. Look, Benjamin Franklin was brilliant. Yes.
Yeah.
For sure.
He's the OG.
He was a creep, dude. He's a
OG Crowley motto bearer. He's the
Yep.
OG, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. That
Yep.
was their Hellfire Club motto. Crowley took that from him.
Yep.
I mean, yeah.
Franklin was no joke, man. And by all accounts was the grandfather in the Continental Congress. When we're hashing out and carving this country out during the Revolution, that dude was the elder statesman. He was the guy that everybody looked to be like, yeah, he was brilliant in that he really rode the line between the loyalists who were trying to still, keep some semblance of a relationship with England. But then he was super, super on the side of the Adamses and the Jeffersons and the Patrick Henrys. And he rode that line. Like, I mean, he was a creep in that way, even in that he was this fence sitter that was,
I mean, it's almost admirable at times, though. He's such a convoluted character. It's like sometimes you think is he a Luciferian or is he like helping the Christians out? Like it's hard to tell with Franklin because he may have, I think you nailed it when you said that he rode the line. I think Man in Black Johnny Cash walked the line all day as this guy kind of did. I think he could have been a double agent even. That's how convoluted this was. I mean, because British intelligence, they were calling him Moses, like as a code name.
Right.
So who was he leading across the wilderness, right? For them to be calling him Moses. Who was he helping to cross the sea? Well, maybe it was us. Maybe it was the founding of this country. He was trying to lead his people to the promised land.
Yeah.
And he like put that Moses symbol on some seals and stuff because he leaned into it. He's like, yeah, I'm the Moses of the new world. They call me Moses. I'm leaning into it. So
cool.
But he may have been a spy too. His in the Hellfire Club, one of his friends was really close to the king at that time. And it's very strange, the dichotomy there, because it seemed you would think because of Franklin's associations that he was working for the king, yet he's working against the king by starting this nation. So very interesting stuff. It's like, okay, what was he really up to?
I think it's very self-serving. Playing both sides of the line, you're going to be okay no matter how things shake out. And that's really how modern politicians do it. That's how you had Thomas Jefferson do it. When he was a young idealist in shaping Virginia during the Revolution, Thomas Jefferson was writing all these, laws and drafts for laws and stuff like that, condemning slavery. Well, then when he gets older and his dad dies and he inherits all of his dad's slaves and he inherits debt and all this stuff, then all of a sudden he wants to start silencing the people who know that he was kind of a staunch abolitionist early on. You're playing both sides because no matter how it shakes out, you're going to end up on top. It's the same thing. That's why, the Prescott Bush funded both sides of World War II. No matter how it shakes out, you're going to make money and you're going to end up on top.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're that big, that's a good point. Because the Rothschilds, they're that big. They're big enough to fund both sides of the war because.
Look at the Rockefellers. Like I said, they funded prohibition. Then they funded the repeal of prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's how you are a creepy oligarch. You have to have, generally, and that kind of points to having loose, if not no morals at all, because you have no stance. If you're willing to take both sides, you have no stance on anything.
Mm-hmm.
You're personal, again, Gnostic, you're your own God. That's your stance. And I really think that's what it comes down to, is that Gnostic ideal versus the other. And if you are the God of your universe and your entire being is devoted to this Gnostic gnosis spark to develop into your own God, that's the dichotomy.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And just to put a bow on it, have you seen, well, okay, speaking of Manly P. Hall, he published a picture. I don't know if you've seen this or not, but it's a picture of Ben Franklin with Francis Bacon standing behind him.
No.
Like out of the shadows, like watching him. And Franklin's looking over the East Coast. Right? You could see he's looking at the line of the Revolutionary War cities, because Boston, Baltimore, New York, Philadelphia, they're all in a line. Speaking of ley lines, right? They're all in a line. And Franklin's kind of looking down at that with Francis Bacon watching him in the back. Symbolic of this whole conversation we've had today, man.
Real quick, just to leave you with a woo-woo fun rabbit hole to go down that'll hurt your head, but is very interesting. And then I got to run. I got to get some pizzas in the oven. But there is a theory that Francis Bacon faked his death, because it's very interesting that he died on Easter and that he actually made it over here to America and ended up within the in the Northeast, and ended up being part of some of the factions of religious kind of fervor that ended up spawning into what became the Mormons 100 years or over 100 years later.
I'll say this. If he did indeed fake his death and he chose Easter to do so, there's probably a reason for that. That's much deeper. Like that's, if you're Francis Bacon and you're working for King James, by the way, he helped translate the King James Bible.
Oh yeah.
So he would have known that Easter as a holiday was a pagan holiday. In name, Easter is Ishtar. So
have you ever read the Easter egg in Psalm 46? If you count 46 words down from the first word of Psalm 46, you end up with the word shake. And if you count up, now you have to skip the last word, because the last word is amen in Hebrew, and that's not really part of the verse. So you skip just that one word, and then count from the next word up, backwards, 46, and you land on spear. In both places, the word shake and the word spear, other words had been used in the King James Bible for those words, like quake and move and rumble for shake. And then spear, you've got lance and arrow and dart and all these other things. But specifically in Psalm 46, 46 letters, 46 words down is shake, 46 words up is spear. And Francis Bacon wrote it. So I think that's
there it is.
Yeah.
We'll close it out with that one, man. Awesome. Enlightening conversation. Wild ride today. Tell everybody where they can find you, Ernie.
Find our back catalog till we get back at it again in the next month or so at Virginia's for Conspiracy Lovers, anywhere you get podcasts. And then we have, I'd suggest most people go check it out on our YouTube page. We do our podcasts on the YouTube page, and we do a lot of visual aids for my personal research. Those are really important. A lot of ley lines and alignments and stuff like that. So Virginia is for conspiracy lovers, and I swear I keep saying it on every podcast that I'm on. We're just about to get back into it. I got two episodes in the can. One had a guy in studio who I randomly met who was in Air Force intelligence on one of those nuclear bases that got shut down by UFOs.
All right.
Yeah, had him right
I
here.
gotta hear that.
Just met him like at a coffee shop, and he was like, "Hey, I have a podcast too." And then he started telling me about his history, and I was like, "Okay, all right, let's do that."
Cool, man.
So-
Cool. Yeah. All right. Well, that sounds good. Put that one out for us so we can all hear it. And I'll just say in closing, thanks again. Thanks everybody who supports the show. Please follow the show. That's all I ask. If you do want to take it a step further, share the show with your friends. That'd be awesome too. If you can, and you want to take it a step further, join the Patreon, because I put new episodes up there every week. But at least follow the show. And with that, we'll head on out of here. As always, break the mold, conquer the realm, and thanks for listening.